So what do we know of Moses? Well, if we start at the beginning, he was a baby put in a basket in the Nile, and Pharaoh's daughter picked him out of the Nile and brought him into the palace, and he became part of the royal family. Well, what do we know of his family, and how do we know that this was all true? Well, Mary Nell Wyatt-Lee and Randall Lee, we actually have some evidence of that in your new book called Battle for the Firstborn. There is actually a statue I'm seeing on this page 83 of, this is Moses and his natural mother?
No, this is Moses. This? And the name on the statues, these statues, by the way, let me preface with this. All the statuary and paintings on the walls and all of that are from a formula in ancient Egypt.
Okay.
You know, that's why they all kind of look alike. But these statues of a woman with a baby, they appear on the scene right now with the time of Moses, because this was, on the statue it says Nephirai and Sinemut. So we know this is Sinemut, who we believe is Moses.
Yeah.
And I said, I believe Nephirai, and Ron did too, that Nephirai was Hatshepsut's name, you know, before she became the royal heir.
I see.
It's confusing.
So this is the woman that pulled him out of the river. So
yes,
she is, even though he did not come to the palace until he was 12,
That's
until
right.
he was weaned because of situations we mentioned in the last episodes.
Yes.
She is claiming him here as a baby, as a small child, already saying, he's mine, he's coming.
He's coming.
And we're going to put this in stone, literally.
Yeah. And they would make these statues, and they would go away in a storehouse for use at a later time, because obviously these statues weren't made overnight.
Yeah, no, these are elaborate.
Yes.
How big are these? Do you know?
Well, like this one right here is probably, it's big. But now this one is shorter than me.
Oh, so they're several feet tall. I mean,
yes.
they're big.
We'll put some footage on your bonus reel that I made, you know, in the Cairo Museum showing these statues, so you can see the size of them.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, very good. And of course, we showed the book already, and you can get the book at
ronwyatt.com.
Okay, very good. Yeah, because we're not going to cover everything in these episodes in this book.
Goodness.
This book is 200 and some pages, so we want to get everyone to get the book and see all the wonderful details in here. One of the details is that, like we mentioned, Moses must have been heir to the throne.
Well, it appears that what happened was his adopted grandfather, because he only had the one daughter. There's evidence he might have had a son earlier, but that he died. Oh, and so the only possibility of an heir to the throne would be through the royal daughter Hatshepsut. And they didn't do queens over there, ruling countries. So the story, as we mentioned, is told of her royal birth and all. But Ron believed that all of the writings and everything in that temple were being set up for Moses' name to be put in there when the time was right. And like I said, these are not propaganda places for the public to come and see. So we can put a little more credence in what's in there, but then again, we can't put too much because they are made for the gods to see. They're mortuary temples. And their belief was that if your name was written, then you still had an afterlife, and that the way to get vengeance on someone was to remove their name from the walls. You know, that was more important than having a mummy, having a body, was having your name written. It's kind of complicated, but you know, I've tried to explain it clearly in here because it was hard for me to understand.
Now, we mentioned last time that there's some confusion. You gave the example of Bob and Malcolm, and that if Bob was given a name like Sir Malcolm later on in his life, that those are concurrent within one person's lifetime, not as some were saying that these are two different names, two different time periods, and adding the two, that is incorrect.
Yes.
So there's some name confusion there. So now we have a name for Moses, Sinemut.
Sinemut. Right.
But then his name gets changed when he is heir. What does that change to?
All of a sudden, the name Sinemut no longer appears on anything. And the way we know this is there by year such and such of the king. All of a sudden, we see a name Thutmose, designated the second, because it's the second one that appears. So it appears that he was raised to the position of Thutmose II, but he didn't go to Memphis to rule. It's like his grandfather kept him at home until he was ready to die. All right?
Okay.
Now, we have the old Pharaoh in the palace. We have Moses as Thutmose II. And as Thutmose II, the old Pharaoh, Grandpa, he's got to do something to protect Egypt. So what he does is he has a co-regent appointed for Moses, okay? So Grandpa's still alive. Moses is given the name Thutmose II as co-regent, but he doesn't move, to Memphis, but he has a co-regent appointed to him. It's kind of a confusion, it's different. Mm-hmm. But Grandpa had to take care of the country. The emperor had to prepare a way for the country to survive.
Now, a co-regent is like you explained to me off the camera, was like a vice president.
Well, yeah, something like that. It's like I'm the king, and I rule down here in Thebes. I rule all of United Egypt. But I can't be up here in Memphis, almost 400 miles away. And that is where the military border is with Canaan, and it has to be protected. Thebes is protecting it from the south. They have to have someone up there, but he is subservient to the guy.
So like Pontius Pilate and Caesar,
yes,
same type of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. This is just for me, not for the
right.
I
this took me a lot of time to figure out.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But anyhow, Moses was given the name Thutmose, quote unquote, the second. But Thutmose III was appointed his co-regent in Memphis. But what happened was Moses went and killed an Egyptian. Mm-hmm. And he had to flee. Because, as we had talked about earlier, he was really worried that his grandfather would realize that he was more loyal to the Hebrews than he would be to the Egyptians. And he knew his grandfather would probably have him killed, so he fled. And at that point in time, old Grandpa, the emperor, was old, and he was ready to die. That's why he had appointed a co-regent for Moses. So when Moses fled, how did they handle it? Well, they handled it by, it's on the walls at Deir el-Bahari, at Hatshepsut's temple, that Thutmose II died.
Okay.
That's it. There's nothing bad written about him.
So Moses
died.
He disappeared, he's gone, he's dead.
Yeah, he's dead.
Missing in action.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then suddenly the guy who was his co-regent in Memphis, he takes off on his first military campaign, and he conquers the whole area. He becomes the greatest warrior pharaoh in Egyptian history, Thutmose III. And when he became emperor, his name was Amenhotep II.
Okay.
Okay. Now, it's confusing, but I'll try to show pictures on the screen of each pharaoh, one, with both names. It's confusing. I apologize for that, but anyhow, they had to handle that, and within a couple of years, the grandfather had died, and this guy becomes pharaoh. And when he becomes pharaoh, he has to appoint a co-regent. And he appoints a man who will become the man who drowned in the Exodus.
So this is the Pharaoh to whom Moses says, "Let my people go."
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And as you can see on the chart here, it was it was 40 years later, when Moses came back.
This lines up.
It lines up, yes.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, something that a lot of people, I'm sure, ask because, we often are curious about, there's no paintings from first century Judea to give us pictures of the apostles or even Yeshua. So Obviously the Egyptians were very fond of carving people's faces, and that kind of thing. They were very, and it's quite exacting. I mean, when you see the pictures in your book, they're very different. It's not all one representation of a man or of a woman, but they're very individualized.
Yes, they are.
So do we have any of Moses, other than when he was a baby on that first statue?
We do. And what I'd like to do is start out by showing you some pictures of Sinemut from his tomb. There appear to be practice drawings by
practice
drawings. Whoever was going to be drawing,
Okay.
Because what they would do is they would draw lines, and what we have on this picture here is pictures of Sinemut that are duplicated. He drew it right here, and he goes, I don't like that. The nose is a little off. And then he scooted over a little and drew it again, And they were found in the rubble, the rock, where his tomb was dug out. And
so in the trash can.
It was in the trash can, yeah.
Wow.
And so they found it. But an interesting thing, as I began to study all these statues, I discovered that they would make statues of a man when he came to the throne as the co-regent. And it obviously took a long time to make these. I don't know how long it took them, but they didn't put the name on them right away. They stuck them away in storage. And we know this because they found caches of statues that don't have any names on them.
So they would wait until the person came into power? Was that it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Things like that. And so when Moses left and the other guy came to the throne, he took all those statues because he had none of his own. And it appears that it wasn't real important to the Egyptians if the statues really looked like them, so much as if their name was on it.
Okay.
Because we know the writing of your name perpetuates it's better to have your name spoken.
Literally written in stone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, anyhow, there's quite a few statues of Sinemut. And as we look at these pictures of Sinemut, Randall made this picture right here. It's in the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth. And this statue is probably about that tall.
Okay, about 2 feet?
When you say that, about 2 feet. And then this one is in the Brooklyn Museum. And he's obviously a little young fella here. Maybe he's 12. Maybe they made that.
Yeah, he looks very childlike.
And here he looks more like a teenager. But what I want you to focus on is the nose. I believe what set him apart was his Hebrew nose.
So his hereditary facial features that are very different than Egyptian.
Yes.
Okay.
And he was a very handsome man. We were talking about Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. There are, I don't know how many, 50 statues along the front.
Wow.
That people say is Hatshepsut. Well, look at this. Look at that nose.
Okay.
They all look like that, right here.
Yeah, again, that is not what you see in typical Egyptian artwork.
Right. And they all look the same. They all have the same face. And I believe that all of these statues would have had the name of Moses when he became emperor. That was the plan, because they were not pictures of a woman. And they say they're Hatshepsut. Here's one of the statues right here of, I'm positive this was Moses, and it was made before he was the king. And the name of Moses III was put on it at a later date.
Okay, on his belt.
On his belt, right here. But here is the statue that I just tremble when I see it. This is at the Cairo Museum. And when you look at this statue, this is life-size. And look at this side profile.
Yeah, he looks,
I began to learn how I could distinguish statues of Sinemut or Moses from other statues strictly from the nose, because the Egyptians were different. They had a different style.
Yeah,
of look.
that is clearly something different.
And he's so handsome, so terribly handsome.
Wow, that is amazing.
I know.
So now we know what Moses looked like.
Yes, we do.
So, Amenhotep, he dies.
Yes.
And how does this hierarchy go now?
Okay, we started out with Amosa, who was
Okay.
the one who kicked out the Hyksos.
Yes.
All right, his son, he made his son co-regent. His son's name was Amenhotep the first. And Amenhotep the first, he as co-regent, he was Amenhotep. When he became the emperor, he took on the name Thutmose, honoring the god Thoth. While he was in Memphis, he obviously had become an adherent of Thoth. But when he moves down here and becomes the emperor, and Moses comes to live in the palace and all, and he has to appoint a co-regent. His co-regent would be Moses. But Moses was still young, and he was, keeping him at home until he died, and then he would go up there. But so Thutmose II would have been Moses' name, as co-regent, but yet he didn't send him to Memphis yet. I think he was keeping an eye on him, and he appointed a co-regent for Moses, who was already it appears that he appointed him maybe 1 or 2 years before Moses fled, and he was up there in Memphis. Now, that would have been another reason why Moses would have been afraid, because this guy was up there.
That makes sense.
Word would have gotten around. But anyhow, when Amenhotep I / Thutmose I dies, Moses had already fled. And so when he had fled, the man who was known now as Thutmose III steps up to the throne by the name of Amenhotep II. He becomes the emperor. I called the main pharaoh the emperor, and he was a warrior par excellence. He conquered the Mitanni, the Hittites, everybody, and he made Egypt the greatest nation in the known world at that time.
So this is the guy who puts Egypt on the map, so to speak.
He sure did.
Okay.
Yes. All because they had the Hyksos war machines and weapons and all of that, So Egypt was now the world conqueror, while Moses is over here in Midian biding his time for 40 years. But when Thutmose III became Amenhotep II and became the emperor, he had to appoint somebody to be his co-regent in Memphis. And he appointed a man that came to be known to us as Thutmose IV.
Okay. And who is Thutmose IV?
I really don't know where he came from. I really don't. We don't know a whole lot about him, except that he, let's see. See, here's a picture of him. And he he had a stele made telling how he had found the Sphinx covered in sand. See, like this picture.
Interesting.
And the Sphinx, the god, Hamarki, or however you pronounce his name, said, if you'll clean the sand from around me, I'll make you Pharaoh. And he did. And so anyhow, they found this stele right here. Dr. Ali Hassan, I had been wanting a close-up picture of that forever, and he took me right up to it, and he's talking to us, and then he tells the story about his uncle, Salim Hassan, who was the first Egyptian archaeologist. And he found this. And he was world famous. And you can Google him, Salim Hassan, and that was his uncle. And so going back to Thutmose III, when he became Amenhotep II, he had an inscription made which tells a story of how he was a a priest in training in the temple of Amun. And that they're proceeding around, they're making a march, all the little, prophets and priests in training. They're marching along like this, and suddenly the God picks him out of the crowd and says that he will lead the country. He will be the Pharaoh. And the truth of the matter is that you wouldn't need a story like that if you were the rightful heir to the throne. So it's suspicious right there that he has a story telling how he came to the throne. And the same with this guy. He comes to the throne, Thutmose IV, Amenhotep II, Amenhotep III, sorry. He has a story too of why he came to the throne. And it was because this God promised him he would be the ruler if he'd clean the sand around him.
Wow.
So those things have to be taken into consideration.
All right, that is fascinating. And this leads to another very famous name that we're going to get into, but hang on to that. We're going to come back to that. I love this. I hope you love this. Randall Lee and Mary Nell Wyatt-Lee have joined us to tell us all this wonderful stuff from Mary Nell Wyatt-Lee's brand new book, Battle for the Firstborn. And I hope you get it. You can find it at ronwyatt.com. And we want to thank you for bringing this to you, to me, to everyone watching this, because it's only you that makes this possible. Donations to A Rood Awakening International make this show possible. So as Michael would say, thank you for shouldering the load, for helping us out. And we'd ask you now to donate to this ministry so we can keep doing this type of thing. We're going to give you a couple minutes to think about it, pray about it. We'll see you in a couple minutes. Thank you. And thank you for supporting Shabbat Night Live. You make it possible to have Mary Nell Wyatt-Lee here and Randall Lee. And before the break, we were talking about something that I think people should get a pen and paper to write down, because there's a lot of stuff we were talking about here. Or you know what, you could just get the book. Just get the book, Battle for the Firstborn. It's all written down, and you're open to page 158 where it says a recap of who's in charge. And so that's what we want to really know. Now, we mentioned right before the break this Amenhotep IV.
Right. No, the third.
The third. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he is, now who's the one that...
He became Pharaoh.
He became Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. But is he the Pharaoh of the Exodus?
He is.
He's the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, who knows that? I mean, what is that common knowledge, or is...
No, and you have to read the evidence to understand it, because in Egyptian records, they're a righteous people in their mind. They write down things the way they want you to remember them. And I remember back in the 90s, it was in the news about a history book in Israel where they did not mention the assassination of, was it Menachem Begin? Yeah, something like that. They left it out. And so it's just an illustration. You know, it's fake media. Is someone
it's
we all know.
Fake news.
Fake news.
4,000 years removed.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so they just put down what they want you to know. And so...
Isn't that interesting? Now, the interesting part about that is not necessarily that he was, well, it is interesting that he was the Pharaoh that drowned in the, you know, in the Red Sea, but who he appoints is the big point here, because this is the king that, or king, so to speak, that everyone in the world recognizes. And who is that?
Well, let me say this. In 1922, Carter broke into a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and when he looked in there, he saw things that nobody's ever seen. The splendor,
changed the world.
It changed the world. They had never even heard of this young man until then, and his name was Tutankhamun, or Tutankhamun.
Aha. Okay, now we get to the nitty-gritty. This is right on the title of your book, The Exodus and the Death of Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was young. He was about 9 when his dad came to the throne.
So he was, wait a second, so he was appointed as a co-regent at 9 years old?
At 9 years old. And his dad lived in Thebes, and he was sent to Memphis. I mean, the records show that. But he had very strong officials around him that were working in his name. You know, things would say something that was done by but by Tutankhamun were actually done by these other men who were actually under instruction from the king in Thebes. It's easy to understand once you get the picture, but once King Tut's tomb was found, the story of his life and telling about him was not accurately portrayed for a reason that's kind of hard to understand. This tomb was full of the most magnificent articles that have ever been found in an Egyptian tomb.
Well, this is the sarcophagus that everyone associates with Egyptology is King Tut's golden sarcophagus with the crossed hands and all that type of thing.
All of those articles, when you look at them closely, the first thing they noticed was the name had been changed on the cartouches. The cartouches, the official name of the pharaoh, they had been changed. All of the things, most of them, maybe even all of them, in his tomb belonged to his father, because his father had drowned in the Red Sea. Now picture this. We know that when the Egyptians would go to war, because of their religious beliefs, they would sometimes take the priesthood of this god and the priesthood of that god with them to give them favor in battle. It appears that it's not written down in this language, but all the evidence points to the fact that Amenhotep III took off after the Israelites and brought with him all of the priesthood of Egypt. He knew the power of the great I Am, and he needed the power of every god in Egypt. And they go and they drowned, every one of them. And word gets back. It's 150 miles or more across the Sinai Peninsula, but we do know that things have been found up in those mountains where they could signal. So word probably got back pretty quickly. What we have left is a picture of, in Egypt, the priests are gone. That was their whole life, was the priesthood. They're all gone. There's nobody to bury the dead. Yet they're left with the firstborn all dead. And we haven't gone into that, but I think that most of your viewers know about Passover. They know what happened there, that Pharaoh would not let the people go until the final plague, the death
plague,
of the firstborn. and from Pharaoh down to the cattle, to the servant, to the cattle. So we have, when he took off, when that Pharaoh took off after the Israelites, he left behind him a dead son that he was devastated by.
This is why, it could explain why he was so angry and chased Israelites for days across the desert.
Yes. And every other family in Egypt was the same way. So,
but now when we go ahead.
We jump forward to this tomb being found, and we find the most magnificent things in this tomb, but yet the tomb is the smallest little thing imaginable. In the diagrams of all the tombs, and here's a picture. This is Tut's tomb diagram. But then 2 or 3 kings later, here it is. They're this long. I'm talking about a diagram in hundreds of feet. Most of the king's tombs were very large with great halls and all. This is a little tomb, very small. And yet all of this stuff was shoved in it, but it wasn't set up. Most of the stuff in all the other tombs, they're set up. They're ready because that was to be your eternal home. The Ba, the Ka, which is all explained in here, of the deceased, it could come and go through this tomb as long as its picture was on the wall, as long as its name was on the wall. And they really didn't even have to have a mummy, but they would make a mummy if they had to, it didn't have to be him. But anyhow, it was just, obviously something happened here. Well, as they began to investigate everything, they found out it didn't have, his name had been changed. But before they found his tomb, and this is fascinating to me, Carter had been digging and he found a small cache in the side of the cliff, and it had cornflowers, and here's a picture of what was found in that area. A floral collar with flowers in it. And these were what the people wore at the funerals. So they found these, and they thought they already had his tomb. So they were surprised when they found out. To make a long story short, the whole story's in here, but to make a long story short, all these flowers that were in these necklaces and collars were only in bloom in March and April.
Okay.
The time of the Passover. Right. And they discovered that, well, let's back up. Normally, the way a body was mummified, it took 70 days. It was soaked in something called natron, which removed everything, dehydrated the body, and then it was mummified. But we found out or they found out from the mummy that Tut had been embalmed by somebody had no idea what they were doing, and he was completely combusted. His body was burnt up, because all the evidence tells of a funeral that was done not in the 70 days, but very quickly. Instead of doing it in a mortuary temple, it was done up in the cliffs, because they had to get him buried. They had a whole nation full of people that had to be buried. And there's more to that story, but I'm not going to tell it because it needs to be understood. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say you've got to read the book because it's complicated. And I'm not trying to sell books because I don't care if I make any money. That's not it,
right.
Okay?
No, there's a lot here.
There is a lot. To
explain it adequately would not suit in the next 5 minutes. Yeah.
Right. And so if you look at like the picture of the funeral mask that was on the young boy, on Tut, who was probably at that time 17, 18, 19 years old, here next to it is a picture of Amenhotep III when he was a boy. And it looks just like him.
It does. It really does.
Yeah. But if you look at a picture of Tut, everybody is unaware that that's what he looked like. He doesn't look like that mask.
That's right. No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's more pictures in here of him.
So basically what we're saying is, in case somebody has not made the connection yet, is that the firstborn of the Pharaoh who died in the Exodus was none other than King Tut.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
And
he wasn't even a king.
No,
really.
he never really ruled.
He was co-regent at best.
Yeah, there was no crown in his burial. He was young, and from what they say about the condition of his mummy was he had a club foot. There were 100 canes in there, so he must have needed a cane to walk.
Interesting.
I don't know, but the story that is projected to the public is very different from what the evidence shows.
So now Egypt doesn't know King Tut's history, obviously, because their chronology is wrong, right? Is that it?
Yes, yes. When Ron did his chronology, well, that was my job. He told me his conclusions, and I had to do the chronology. And what we did is we started with, the scripture that says that it was, 400 years after, the fourth year of King Solomon.
Right.
I can't even remember right now, but you can just put that on the screen. And so we knew what that date was, so we were able to calculate 1445 to 46 for the date of the Exodus. And then everything else went from there. And it fits. It all fits. So, I have no doubt that there's not even a professional who would even listen to this theory. But it's backed up. If you read the book, it's backed up.
Why do you think Egyptologists don't recognize that? How can they not? Is it just...
Okay. One thing I learned pretty quick when I married Ron. Now, remember, I'd only known him, a couple of months when I married him. I knew nothing about archaeology. The first time I went with him to meet an archaeologist, and I'm not going to tell who this is because he's still alive. We took this man to the airport in Louisville. And while we're sitting there in the airport talking, he says to Ron, now this is a Jewish archaeologist, and he knew Ron, and he said, "You do things all wrong, Ron." He says, "You don't dig." Now, I heard this with my own ears. He says, "You don't dig to find out what's there. You do your research and determine what you think needs to be there, and then you make it happen." And I heard that myself.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't sound right.
That's what I heard. I heard it, and the thing was, Ron had told me that earlier, and he even told somebody some video about that. He said that I wouldn't believe him, but then I heard it from the horse's lips myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And after being around a lot of archaeologists and all through the years, they didn't know who I was, but Randall and I would go to the conventions and everything. I would learn about there's, how do I say this and be nice? They don't accept being wrong. And I don't mean easily, they just don't. They do not. If they've said it, it may as well be written in stone. They won't listen to anything else. So I believe that we are, how we're talking about vitamins? I believe we have to do our own research. We have to take the available information based on what we believe and fit it in there. And if you believe in the Bible and you take the evidence that's out there and see if it fits. If it doesn't fit, if something doesn't fit, you have to throw it out. That's it.
Right.
But we're responsible for ourselves. And this is such a difficult subject right here that it took me a long time to get all the information together. But I believe that anybody can look at this information and make a decision what they believe based on everything that's here.
And there's a lot here. 270-some pages. Mary Nell Wyatt-Lee, this is your book, Battle for the Firstborn, the Exodus, and the Death of Tutankhamun. I encourage everyone to get it. It's a wonderful book. I don't think we're done here. Would you stay for another episode, Randall Lee? Would you?